At 2:30 in the morning on October 20th, 2022, CCTV cameras captured two men walking through the Ballycraigie estate in Antrim, Northern Ireland. Their movements were deliberate, unhurried, purposeful. They weren't running, they weren't hiding. They walked like men who knew exactly where they were going and what they were about to do. Minutes later, a neighbor heard sharp bangs cutting through the silence, the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Inside a house on Craig Hill, 44-year-old Liam Christy was shot 8 times at close range. The bullets struck his head and face, execution style. When police arrived hours later, they found him face down in his bedroom, lying in a pool of blood. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. It wasn't a random act of violence. This was a targeted assassination, carried out with the clinical precision of an organized hit. Within weeks, 3 men would be charged with murder. But to understand why Liam Christy died that night, you need to understand the impossible life he'd been living for nearly a decade. A life that defied every unwritten rule of Northern Ireland's post-conflict criminal underworld, and a life that was always going to end this way. Welcome to UK True Crime Files. Subscribe if you want more UK cases where the full story is darker and stranger than the headlines suggest. Liam Christy was 44 years old when he died, a father of 3, and a career criminal who had spent decades navigating one of the most dangerous landscapes in the United Kingdom. Northern Ireland's criminal underworld isn't like the rest of Britain. It's a place where political allegiance, territorial control, and organized violence intersect in ways outsiders struggle to comprehend. Christy's criminal record included multiple convictions for violent offences, most notably armed home invasion robberies carried out alongside members of the Continuity IRA. The Continuity IRA, a dissident Republican group that rejected the peace process and continued armed operations long after the Good Friday Agreement. These weren't opportunistic crimes. They were calculated operations, executed with paramilitary precision, designed to fund the organization's activities and establish Christy's credentials within Republican militant circles. But Christy wasn't an ideologue. He was a pragmatist. And as Northern Ireland's paramilitary landscape shifted in the years following the ceasefires, so too did the opportunities for entrepreneurial criminals willing to cross traditional boundaries. Christy made a pivot that would have been unthinkable to most. Despite his Catholic background and his Republican associations, he became a drug dealer for the LVF, the Loyalist Volunteer Force, one of Northern Ireland's most notorious loyalist paramilitary organizations. Think about that for a moment. A Catholic, in a loyalist estate, dealing drugs for the LVF. For nearly a decade, he lived in Ballycraigie, a predominantly loyalist district of Antrim, where LVF-linked gangs maintained territorial control. Catholics do not typically reside in loyalist strongholds. They certainly don't supply drugs for loyalist paramilitaries while living among them. Christy did both. It was a high-wire act that required calculation, nerve, and an almost reckless disregard for the inherent dangers of his position. And by October 2022, that act had become unsustainable because someone had decided it couldn't continue. To understand how precarious Christy's position truly was, you need to understand the place he called home. Ballycraigie is not just a housing estate in Antrim, it's a territory, shaped and controlled by paramilitary influence that predates the peace process and persists to this day. As far back as 2006, investigative reporting identified the area's criminal underworld as being controlled by members of a notorious North Belfast loyalist family with direct ties to the LVF. These weren't street-level dealers operating independently. They were organized, hierarchical, and ruthless in maintaining territorial control. By 2024, the evidence of that control remained visible throughout the estate. Loyalist-only graffiti appeared on walls and gable ends. racist and sectarian threats were directed at residents deemed outsiders, people who didn't fit the approved profile. Intimidation campaigns targeted anyone who challenged the area's unwritten rules. This was a district governed not by civic authority, but by criminal enforcement. Where disputes weren't settled in courtrooms, they were settled through violence, threats, and expulsion. And Liam Christy, a Catholic, a former Republican associate, now a dealer for the very paramilitaries who might once have killed him on sight, lived at the center of it all. For nearly 10 years, he managed to survive in this environment. Whether through usefulness, connections, or sheer audacity, he carved out a space for himself in hostile territory. But that space was never secure. It was conditional, temporary. And in the weeks before his murder, Christy received an order that left no room for negotiation. He was told to leave Ballycraigie. In the weeks before his murder, Liam Christy received an order that carried lethal implications. Sources familiar with the local criminal hierarchy reported that an LVF-affiliated drugs gang had demanded Christy's departure from the estate. The reasons for this expulsion order remain unclear from the available evidence. It may have been a business dispute, debts unpaid, territory encroached, profits disputed. It may have been sectarian, a Catholic who had overstayed his welcome in loyalist space. It may have been both. What is clear is that such orders are not suggestions. In paramilitary-controlled territories, expulsion directives are enforced through intimidation, violence, or, if resistance continues, execution. Christy did not leave. Whether through defiance, miscalculation, or an inability to relocate quickly enough, he remained in his Craig Hill home as the deadline passed. For a man who had spent his career navigating dangerous alliances, this decision would prove fatal. But this wasn't the first time Christy had gambled with loyalist paramilitaries. Years earlier, he had participated in a conspiracy so audacious that its collapse likely shaped his standing among paramilitary factions for the rest of his life. A conspiracy that involved the planned assassination of one of the most senior figures in loyalist paramilitarism. Liam Christy had been ordered out of Ballycraigie, but his history with loyalist organizations was far more complicated than anyone outside those circles realized. At some point in his criminal career, Christy became involved in a plot to assassinate Jackie MacDonald, a senior leader of the Ulster Defence Association, the largest loyalist paramilitary organization in Northern Ireland. The origins of this conspiracy lay in the international drug trade. Eastern European and Russian wholesale suppliers had grown frustrated with MacDonald's vocal anti-drug stance, which threatened their distribution networks in Belfast. A decision was made at the highest levels of organized crime. MacDonald would be eliminated. A professional assassin, described as Russian or Eastern European, was recruited for the operation, and Liam Christy's role was logistical. He would provide transport, facilitate the hitman's entry into Belfast, support the execution, and assist in the assassin's escape south across the border into the Republic of Ireland. The plan was methodical, the resources were professional, and had it succeeded, it would have reshaped the balance of power within loyalist paramilitarism. But the operation was scrapped. A UVF operative, a member of the Ulster Volunteer Force, another loyalist paramilitary organization, warned Christy that the assassination of a figure as prominent as Jackie MacDonald would trigger an unprecedented police response. The PSNI would deploy every available resource. The resulting investigation would bring unbearable pressure on all criminal networks operating in the region, loyalist and Republican alike. Christy heeded the warning. The plot was abandoned, but the conspiracy's existence and Christy's willingness to participate in the killing of a senior UDA leader while simultaneously dealing drugs for LVF-linked networks illustrated just how precarious his position truly was. He was a man operating without permanent allegiance, navigating a world where such flexibility could be an asset or a death sentence, depending on the day. That conspiracy should have been his death sentence. Instead, he went right back to dealing drugs in loyalist territory until October 2022. The execution occurred in the early morning hours in the residential quiet of the Craig Hill area of Ballycraigie Estate. At approximately 2:30 a.m., CCTV cameras captured two men walking purposefully toward Liam Christy's home. Their movements were deliberate, unhurried. This was not a spontaneous act. It was a planned operation. Around the same time, a neighbor heard loud bangs, sharp, unmistakable sounds that shattered the pre-dawn silence. The assailants entered Christy's residence. They made their way upstairs, and in an upstairs bedroom, they found their target. Christy was shot 8 times at close range. The wounds were concentrated on his head and face, a signature of execution-style killing, designed not merely to kill, but to send a message. There was no struggle, no defensive wounds suggesting he fought back. The attack was swift, overwhelming, and final. When police arrived hours later, they discovered Christy's body face down in the bedroom, lying in a pool of blood. The scene bore all the hallmarks of a targeted assassination. Forensic examination confirmed what investigators already suspected. This was premeditated murder, carried out with precision and intent. By 9 a.m., the body was officially discovered. The investigation began immediately. The Police Service of Northern Ireland launched a full-scale murder investigation. CCTV footage was recovered and analysed. Forensic teams processed the crime scene. Witnesses were interviewed. Intelligence networks were activated. Within days, suspects emerged. On October 26, 2022, just 6 days after the murder, the first arrest was made. Jonathan David Patterson from Mooney Park in Antrim was charged with murder and firearms offences. He was remanded immediately, denied bail, and held pending trial. 4 days later, on October 30, 2022, a second suspect was brought before the courts. Paul Arthur Armstrong from Hawkwood Terrace in Antrim was charged with murder and the illegal possession of 2 handguns. The specificity of the firearms charges suggested investigators had recovered substantial evidence linking Armstrong directly to the weapons used in Christy's execution. But the investigation didn't stop there. Months passed, and in February 2023, a third suspect was apprehended. Henry Charles Hales from North Belfast was arrested and subsequently charged with murder and firearms offences. His inclusion in the case suggested a broader conspiracy, multiple individuals coordinating across different districts, with Hales potentially serving as a link between Antrim-based operatives and Belfast criminal networks. All 3 men were jointly charged and remanded pending trial. 3 men, 2 from Antrim, 1 from North Belfast, all charged with executing Liam Christy in his own bedroom. By late 2023, the case was moving through the Northern Ireland court system, with prosecutors preparing to argue that Christy's murder was a coordinated assassination carried out by multiple individuals operating with clear intent. As of the available information, the trial remains ongoing. But what actually got him killed? We cover UK cases carefully and thoroughly. If that's the kind of true crime content you're after, consider subscribing. The precise motive for Liam Christy's murder has not been officially established, but the context of his life provides a constellation of possibilities, each rooted in the dangerous choices that defined his career. Christy was a Catholic living in a loyalist stronghold. He was a former associate of Republican militants, now dealing drugs for loyalist paramilitaries. He had participated in a plot to kill a senior UDA leader while simultaneously operating within LVF-dominated territory. And in the weeks before his death, he had been ordered to leave Ballycraigie by an LVF-affiliated drugs gang, an order he did not obey. Any one of these factors could have generated lethal consequences. Together, they created an untenable position. Was his murder a business dispute, debts unpaid, territory encroached, profits disputed. According to sources familiar with the local criminal hierarchy, financial disagreements in paramilitary-controlled drug networks are often resolved through violence, particularly when the individual involved lacks the protection of a powerful faction. Was it sectarian enforcement? A Catholic who had overstayed his welcome in loyalist space? Northern Ireland's post-conflict landscape may appear peaceful to outsiders, but in certain estates, sectarian boundaries remain rigid and unforgiving. Christy's presence in Ballycraigie was always conditional, tolerated only as long as he remained useful. Was it retribution for past betrayals, real or perceived? The MacDonald assassination plot, though abandoned, marked Christy as someone willing to cross loyalist organizations. In a world governed by loyalty and hierarchy, such flexibility breeds suspicion, and suspicion can be fatal. Or was it simply the inevitable conclusion of ignoring an expulsion order? In paramilitary-controlled territories, defying a direct command is not just disobedience, it's a challenge to authority, and such challenges are punished publicly, to reinforce control and deter others from making the same mistake. The available evidence does not provide definitive answers. What it does provide is a portrait of a man who operated in a world where loyalty is conditional, alliances are transactional, and mistakes, whether tactical, financial, or territorial, are punished with finality. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. Nearly 2 years have passed since Liam Christy was shot 8 times in his bedroom. The legal proceedings against Jonathan David Patterson, Paul Arthur Armstrong, and Henry Charles Hales continue, with the final resolution of their case yet to be determined. What remains undisputed is this. On the night of October 20th, 2022, a targeted execution took place in a loyalist housing estate in Antrim. A man who had spent his career crossing sectarian, territorial, and criminal boundaries, a Catholic who worked with Republicans, then loyalists, who plotted assassinations and dealt drugs in hostile territory, was killed in a manner consistent with paramilitary enforcement. Liam Christy's story is not unique in Northern Ireland's post-conflict landscape. It is one thread in a larger tapestry of organized crime, sectarian legacy, and the enduring influence of paramilitary structures that persist long after ceasefires are signed. In certain districts across Northern Ireland, traditional governance has never fully taken hold. Power remains decentralized, enforcement remains privatized, and disputes are resolved not through courts or councils, but through violence. The Good Friday Agreement brought an end to the Troubles, but it did not dismantle the networks that had grown powerful during those years. Those networks adapted, they evolved, and in places like Ballycraigie, they continue to govern, quietly, ruthlessly, and with near impunity. Liam Christy understood those rules better than most. He exploited them, he navigated them, and for nearly a decade, he survived in a world that should have killed him years earlier. But on a cold October morning, in an upstairs bedroom in Ballycraigie, those risks reached their inevitable conclusion, and the lines he spent decades crossing finally converged. If you're new here, this channel covers UK true crime cases with care and context. Consider subscribing. Liam Christy's life was defined by choices that most people would never contemplate. He moved between worlds that were supposed to remain separate. He built alliances with people who were supposed to be enemies, and he survived, for years, in an environment where survival itself was an anomaly. But in Northern Ireland's criminal underworld, there are no permanent safe spaces, only temporary arrangements, and when those arrangements collapse, there is no appeal, no negotiation, no second chance. Christy knew this. He had seen it happen to others. He had participated in it himself. And yet, he stayed. Whether that was courage, defiance, or simply a miscalculation of how much time he had left, we may never know. What we do know is that on October 20th, 2022, the world he had spent decades navigating finally closed in around him. two men walked calmly through Ballycraigie estate in the early hours of the morning. They entered his home, they climbed the stairs, and they executed him in his own bedroom. 8 shots, close range, head and face. A message delivered with absolute clarity. 3 men now stand accused of his murder. Their trial will determine legal guilt, but the broader questions about why Liam Christy died, about who ultimately ordered his execution, about the systems that allowed it to happen, those questions may never be fully answered. Because in certain parts of Northern Ireland, some things remain unspoken. Some debts are settled in silence, and some stories end exactly the way they were always going to end.